Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. It is exactly 8:51 a.m. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media, and our next guest is Mohamed Kharwa. He is the president of the South African Booksellers Association to talk to us about a very sad turn of events, and that is the possible, I should imagine, the possible closure. We hope it doesn't come to that, but the possible closure of a family business, and that is the Adams Bookshops. They were very active over the past 150 years, very especially in the KZN area. Mohammed, Salaam alaikum, welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam, and Jazakallah for having me.
Okay, a sad day indeed if this chain of bookstores does not get rescued. And you're going to tell us what we understand by being rescued. It is really about an institution closing its doors forever, and a community, the KZN community, being that much poorer for this institution shutting down.
Correct, and thank you for the opportunity. I think we underestimate the value and the importance of having access to books, and in some ways, I think we've taken it very much for granted. Adams Bookstore has been around for 150 years. I mean, this is in their history and their description, they talk about it as the brothers coming down, and Durban was still a one-street town, and that's how long ago that they started in the industry. Expanding into books and varying, etc. The key message here is the one where we need to be able to create a sustainable environment for our students, for our children, for us, to be able to talk to and to be able to get new ideas out there. And a key part of that is books. I mean, the first thing from a Muslim perspective and from your audience perspective, the first word that the Quran was read. And we've got to start off with that as a basis, and we've got to be able to share ideas in a world where people are blindly putting out content that is just fake. It's misinformation. People are putting forward ideas that are populist. We have a situation in South Africa where the studies have come across that 73% of our grade 4 children are functionally illiterate. And that statistic turns out when we see that 64% of our grade 10 students, or our students who start grade 1, drop out by grade 10. So if we have to kind of just extrapolate those two statistics as a start, we can see that a big part of the problems that we face come from literacy. And literacy, the best way to combat that is to get people reading, to get people access to books. There's studies in South Africa which talk about the number of books in a home. And, we may take, especially if we come from environments with a strong history, a strong reading culture, a strong access to content, we might take that for granted. And we just assume, oh, well, you know what, we'll get it on the cell phone. But the reality is that it's not just a content element of a physical book. It's an entire experience of exploring, finding content. And that's what a bookstore is. It's a place for you to go in there and find something that you otherwise wouldn't have experienced, you wouldn't have been exposed to. And to talk to someone who can tell you, maybe you should try this, and build a regular relationship. We are losing that. I think one of the other things that have come across just in the last week was a study in Europe. The European Booksellers Association, they put out a study which says that in Germany, where they have a very, very good reading culture, the reading level or the amount of reading that happens in a community drops by about 30% when you lose your community and your local bookstores. And we have been losing them in a phenomenal way in South Africa over the last 10 years through a combination of different factors. And that's what we as the bookselling industry want to be able to highlight, that for this to work, we need a complete shift in mindset. We need a complete shift in the way that we deal with content and the way that we actually view books and view content as the public. It's not just print and ink on paper. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, and it's a lot of value that we get that is there in a book. And we need to actually, celebrate that as much as
Okay,
anything.
so Mohammed, you are the president of the South African Booksellers Association. I want you to unpack that for us, how active you've been in this space and for how long. And what do we need to be doing to combat these type of situations? I'm kind of thinking uh, one of the issues might well be technology and just the way our children and we access information, and how we consume content. It's very, very worrying. It's convenient, it's quick, but it comes at a huge risk and a huge cost as well. So those are things we want to delve into. But also there is this perception that books are unaffordable. So how do you respond to that? So let's look at all of this, and how do we conscientize, go forward, conscientizing our community, our youth, and South Africa as a whole to realize the value of books, and how you can never compare that with your cell phone or your iPad or your device.
Yeah. So I want to start off in saying I love technology. I'm actually somebody who, I spend probably too much time with technology personally because, I enjoy it. I look at the value in there. But at the same time, we've got to cross-reference that with what is it that I'm gaining from it and what am I losing from it, which is, I think, where we've got to start from. And in the context of a book, what is coming across is that people are losing an intimacy with knowledge. Now, to answer your question on technology, we're not ready for it. We're not actually enabled for it for the vast majority of our population. And that's the first part of the problem. The second part of the problem is that it's not the same experience. So we can look at, for example, whether it is an experience of going to listen to someone give a live lecture and having an audience when you give that talk, or having something that's pre-recorded and posted on the internet. There is a very, very different engagement. There is a different kind of experience that comes from there. And that's the same thing that we would have with a book. We've had one of our members who very nicely put it. He said, reading a book is not just about the words. It's about that sense of feeling. There's a touch element. There's a smell element. And all of that becomes part of the ability for you to gain multiple points of reference. So the technology part is not actually the critical element. The technology part is just one part of the challenge that booksellers and the book industry faces. But it also is a supportive part, because technology allows people who may not have had access, whether they live out in remote areas, and don't have access, to be able to point, click, and order something and have it delivered to them for a few bucks. The industry's changed that way, where, during lockdown, we as an industry wrote up to the Command Council and said, please let us open. Let us make sure that people who are at home can study, people who are students, people who are teaching their children, and people who can just find the opportunity now to be able to access that content. And government was very, very encouraging, and they actually supported and put us onto an essential products list for the provision of study material. So from that perspective, that is what we do as an industry. We are trying to make sure that message gets out. It is very, very difficult. In terms of what we can do to drive the culture, to be able to push that forward, one of the key things is, and we've been talking about this, and there are a lot of other initiatives. Nali Bali is one of them. There are a lot of reading initiatives to try and drive that. But the first thing that we can do is read to our young kids. There are studies, again, and there's lots of evidence that if you spend 10 minutes as a parent or as an adult reading to a child every night, it builds a culture of reading. And it doesn't mean that they're about to even understand it. It's the experience that they get to see that getting that and reading that makes a massive difference. Recently I played Scrabble with friends of mine and their kids. And the one young lady made out a word, LOX, locks. And I thought to myself, now this is really chancing it. And she says, no, I read it in a book. And we Googled it like everybody does. And we said, well, it's actually a type of salted fish. But I've read that in a book. And that is what what comes through in terms of a person's ability to gain from it beyond the ability of just saying, you know what, I'm only going to read that which I've always read. And I think that that's a big challenge in our community as well. We almost get to a point where we read what we've already read to reinforce what we already believe. Whereas what we need to do is also take ourselves and challenge ourselves a little bit. Read something that makes us uncomfortable and say, is there something from here that I can agree with? Is there something I could disagree with? What can I take from it? And what is it that I actually need to be able to understand the other person? We have a phenomenal, culture of writing in South Africa. We don't value it. We don't see that. South Africa, for a country at the bottom of Africa, has had 2 literature Nobel laureates, 2, where other countries with, double the capacity, 10 times the size, haven't even had 1. And that means something. That should be something for us. And we need to protect the industry. A big part of the problem that we're currently facing is some of the bread and butter stuff, where the industry needs to be supported to be able to say, we will supply the schools, we will supply the libraries, we will supply the institutions, we will do all of these things. And we've got the content, we've got the skills, we can put together content. You mentioned the issue about the price of books. South African books are actually very, very cheap. What people don't realize is that when we get content from outside the country, very often we as an industry, and being a healthy, sustainable or established industry, have been able to negotiate special pricing to get books into South Africa, and to be able to do that and make it affordable. But the vast majority of the books that we produce are local, and they don't cost so much. If we compare something that you can buy, you can read, you can share, you can sell on. So we have, people who do second-hand books. So you can actually recover a big chunk of your money. If you do all of those things, you actually have something which is of value, and it works out to, on average, we did some studies, and we said, academic books that are South African produced average around 350 rands. If you're importing a book for astronomy or psychology or data science or something of that sort, those type of books coming from abroad will cost you 700 or 800 rand. We are not looking, and that's 85 to 90% of the stuff is produced locally, is local content, that we need to be able to do that. And we can't say it's expensive when a person is looking at it in the comparative of what they would pay to go to a movie and get a movie ticket, or what they do for a meal.
Okay, so Mohammed, let me ask you this question. Obviously, it would be a really sad day if this bookstore or these bookstores should shut down. And I would imagine the Adams bookshops aren't the only bookstores in the firing line. If they are experiencing what they're experiencing currently, that does bode badly for the rest of the industry. Is there anything at all that we as a community could do to try and save the bookstores from shutting down? Where and how does government come into the picture? Surely they have a role to play.
Yes, so definitely. I mean, we've advocated for a number of years to government to say, one of the things we think that would stimulate it is removing VAT on books, like is the norm in most other countries. We understand that that's a complicated process, etc. But we even suggested and proposed that they remove the VAT on books that are prescribed for studies, etc. So that's one possible, incentive that government can have. The most important one, though, is government needs to get back to buying books. So, for example, in KZN and in Durban, the eThekwini municipality has had a tender about 3 to 4 years ago, gone through a whole process because of questions about how and what they awarded. And then they've stopped buying books for our local libraries. Now, those books would normally be bought from booksellers who would go out there and present to them and say, these are all the things that are available. We would like to be able to supply it to you. You stock it, and the funds are there. The funds are allocated. Where are those funds? We've recently had an experience where booksellers have gone out and bid to be able to supply to the KZN Provincial Library. And these are millions of rands that are being provided by government for the supply of textbooks to libraries across the province. They then went in and awarded this tender to 14 companies who have nothing to do with bookselling. I mean, there are guys who are supplying grain and farm appliances and completing, our tender businesses, and one which is actually a travel agency. And we ask the question and we don't get the answers. And people are saying, well, what doesn't connect here? If you're not, as KZN's provincial, the custodians of our art, our culture, our history, our education, if you're not actually supporting our businesses in the province, where do you expect the people of the province to then go in and find something else for them to read, for something that they can actually use, or a study guide, or, and it's beyond that. It is the puzzles, it is the games, it is things that we can actually put together that become part of that entire cultural learning, even family experience. We don't do board games like we used to in the past, I think, in many homes. And it's a great opportunity for us to actually engage with our children.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm particularly concerned about the Adams bookshops. As you and I were talking, we had a picture flash on screen of Adams bookstores back in the day, alhamdulillah, a beautiful old building there with, I should imagine, amazing historical significance. And this, if these bookstores should close down, a part of our community's heritage is lost with them, isn't it?
Correct, and it's not just the Adams bookstore. I mean, Adams bookstore has obviously gotten prominence and gotten attention because of its history, because of its place in the community, because they've had such a long history as well, and their size, and they are a substantial player in KZN. But we've seen smaller bookstores that have gone through this across the board. Whether it is, we've had people like Books and Books in Durban North. We've had people like Go Mobile, which was in Pietermaritzburg. We've seen this across the board, where a lot of bookstores have gone through that process of actually closing their retail outlets or closing down. And then we've also seen the other extreme, where we've seen bookstores that have actually gone in terms of cutting down their footprint, cutting down their space, cutting down the number of stores. What can we do as a community? Go in there, look at what you're looking for, find content, buy it, read it. That's about the most that we can ask for. And we're not asking, engage with your bookstores and say, I want to know something about, and look for things that you don't, you might have had an interest in. There is so much more to be put together, and that comes from this. It's not just about academic learning. It's about opening our minds. It's about opening our ideas. It's about people being able to express themselves. Even if we don't like what they're saying sometimes, we have to be able to listen, so that we can understand and build a rational, intelligent argument, not shut down things. We look at it, whether it is, the concepts of war and the concepts of what the media are doing, or freedom of expression in India. There are other challenges that we're not talking about. For example, in Florida, in the United States, the government has actually taken out critical race theory from maths textbooks. In India, they've actually rewritten history textbooks to exclude any reference to Mughal history, including, in some places, they're removing references to Mahatma Gandhi. Now,
okay, let me ask you there, how do we then, as readers and communities as a whole, challenge something like that? That's my one question. I also need to know, I think the other big question is the issue around Islamic literature, because obviously if Adams are in the firing line right now, and you've alluded to other smaller bookstores, there is a real threat to the smaller bookstores that cater for us, for our Islamic literature. So that is very concerning as well.
Agreed. And there again, we've seen this, where we've seen people who've put together really, really good content and varied content. There are quite a few here in Durban. I know of a lot that, in Cape Town, etc., who have brought in different content. And it is a struggle. And very often the argument is it's too expensive. We've had people, and I actually met with Minister or ex-Minister Ismail Wadi not too long ago with the launch of his book, and I met with him and we had this conversation. He said, "The books are too expensive." And my words to him were, if somebody wants to read something, they will feel the value in it and they will pay the money for it. Yes, there's a point at which it just becomes unaffordable for them. But if I see value in something, whether it is 30 Rand, 50 Rand, or 500 Rand, if I believe that there's value in that and I can understand that value, I will find the way to actually access the content. making it cheaper doesn't actually bring more readers. That's the part that we've seen as booksellers. What is happening as well is the less books that are read, the less there is the demand, the higher the price actually gets, because once the book is written, the reproduction cost is actually low. It's the investment in the author, in the content development, etc., that is very, very high. So with our Islamic contact, with the content, and religious books are actually the one sector that have actually still been relatively stable in South Africa. And it's an interesting one where in a number of years ago, exclusive books opened up in Soweto. And one of the people writing an article said, we see three things that are being sold in this bookstore. And the one is religious content, the second one is personal development, and the third one is kids' books. But people are not reading beyond that. And what is it, and why is that the case? Well, it reflects the importance of belief, of faith, of people. It shows that they want to absorb that knowledge. But at the same time, when they do so, do they actually go out there and look for it? Are they prepared to put that value? If you look at a book that is covering the history of Islam, you're talking about maybe a book which is about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? How much do you actually value learning about that? Is it worth 10 rands, 100 rands, or 1,000 rands, or is its value actually infinite? In that, what is it going to guide you as a person and give you in terms of a belief system? It's not about the money. It's about what am I going to get from it? And that's, I think, what we need to get out there, is that books are not just that piece of paper. I always laugh when I see people, especially on these online interviews, where they make sure they've got a lovely bookshelf full of books behind them. And we've actually had instances where people have come in and said, I need to fill books on my bookshelf because when I have these interviews, I need to actually put a bookshelf so that people can see that I read. And always we have a laugh at it, that some of it's props. But the vast majority of people who are getting to that point are the ones who are, engaging with it and who are able to look at content that is taking them beyond where they are. As somebody said, you can sit with a book and you can be traveling to the stars, or you can going down to the deepest ends of the sea. You can be anywhere if you actually engage with it. If you actually have that in front of you, and it is something that you can share as well. And we need to be able to support that, and we need to be able to drive that as a community.
Okay, Mohamed, finally, are there plans afoot within the KZN Muslim community and the wider community for that matter as well, to try and prevent the shutdown of the Adams bookstores? Crucial, is it not?
I can tell you from the information that I've received from Adams, and in terms of where they're at, and they have actually looked at it. And this is the Adams family who said we are at a point where we need to divest. And it's not just the Adams family. They actually set up an employees trust. So there are employees who are actually going to be impacted by this as well. And it comes down to viability. Now, that's going to be very much a business decision. And at the end of the day, I think we have to recognize that whether it is knowledge, whether it is food, whether it is clothing, ultimately we have to recognize that someone has to be paid for the services that they provide. And that requires a transfer of funds. It's got to be economically viable. And that is going to be subject to a lot of people making that decision. I know I've been approached by a couple of people just based on the comments that have been shared on social media to say, we're interested in engaging. And I've referred them to the people who are managing that. Where Adams is at the moment is that they are looking to try and scale back and to be able to consolidate so that they can, in fact, present themselves in the way that would make it most attractive and economically viable. What that's going to turn to, I don't know. I know that they are, like any good business, and having to be very, very responsible. They've been very, very careful and been very, very open and communicated with their staff, with the bookselling community, and they've got to make some very, very tough decisions. Business, unfortunately, is not, doesn't survive on sentiment and good wishes. So it's going to be a tough one. And I think that that's probably one which somebody in that space is going to have to make a call as to whether or not they're able to make that commitment to build Adams. But at the same time, there are other booksellers in KZN. There are other booksellers across the country who will take up the challenge, who will say, if you cannot find it there, get in touch with us, look for us, we will find what you want, we will get you what you want, we will make sure that we can try and do that. And that is the message that we are giving to our booksellers is, it is very painful, it is very concerning. We've had flooding, we've had people who've been impacted by looting, we've had impacts of just the poor economic climate, supply chain from importing and the ports. All of those things have been a massive issue for all businesses in the country and in KZN specifically recently. And when we're looking at that, we've got to be able to say, in that context, what are we doing? Well, we will be there. We will do what we can do as the industry, and we will make sure that we are there for the public. We are there for our children, and we are there for our authors. We've got to recognize the authors and publishers. They actually provide a huge role in making sure that you've got good quality content. You've got it accessible, that you've got people who, we do judge a book by its cover. And there's actually a lovely TED talk about a guy who draws covers for books. And the cover art or the cover presentation on a book can actually be as critical to a person making a choice to read it as opposed to what is inside it. So whether it is the person who does that graphic design and presents it, the person who does the layout and how to edit it, all of those people are part of this entire chain of getting information, getting ideas, sharing things, their experiences. How many of us know about whether it is our South African history, our political history, who was involved in it? There's a lovely book called Portraits of Muslim Portraits, and it talks about all of the different Muslim activists who've been involved in the history of South Africa in terms of transforming South Africa against the fight against apartheid. There are lots of different things. We just need to take the time to sit down and engage with it. And maybe one of the changes is we all need to slow down a little bit and spend some time reading beyond the common things that we do, and beyond the important things, whether it's, we dedicate time to reading our Quran, we dedicate time to reading, other books. Well, let us dedicate a small amount of time. 10 minutes a day to our children would be a good start. 10 minutes a day for ourselves would actually be a fantastic opportunity to go out there and say, let's get ourselves doing things. I've traveled, alhamdulillah, in other countries.
I'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but we do thank you indeed for your insights. Mohamed Kharwa, President of the South African Booksellers Association, do ask that the Adams bookstores, that they can come to some sort of resolution, that they can come up with a feasible solution, that at least not all of the stores shut down. They can keep open 1 or 2 flagship stores and let that institution carry on this amazing history and tradition of bookstores in KZN and throughout the country. Once again, shukran for your time. Salaam alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. It is 19 after 9 o'clock. News and Views with me, Julie Ali. Do hope you've enjoyed the interviews thus far. Standing by is Sandile Swana, political analyst, to talk to us about, obviously, the ANC Eastern Cape Conference. It is on a nice edge, is it not? And we are going to unpack that for you after we've taken an ad break.